Next up, whether you're going teetotal or just want to cut down, top tips on transforming your relationship with alcohol. Rupy Warrington, creator of the term Sober Curious, Caggie Dunlop and Claire Warner, founder of Seedlip's sister brand Æcorn, share what the Sober Curious movement means to them.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to take some time this afternoon to chat a bit about the growing Sober Curious movement. For many of us during lockdown, we've seen our drinking escalate quite dramatically, and there's lots of stats out there about spikes in alcohol sales increasing. And we joke with our friends about quarantinis and sort of the working from home cocktail hour getting earlier and earlier in the day. But really, it's not funny, and alcohol can have such a detrimental effect on our mental health. And at the moment, we need as much mental resilience as possible to get through what we're going through. So I've got three lovely guests here with me today, all who have either cut out or cut back on alcohol and seen some quite dramatic changes to their lives. It's been quite life-changing, I think, for some of you. So let me begin by introducing, and this is not a preachy panel, this is just a kind of exploration about what life could be like if we cut down or cut out alcohol. So first, Claire. We've got Claire Warner, who is the co-founder of Æcorn Drinks. And I'm sure you can explain it better than me, but I think it's all about having non-alcoholic drinks that are as celebratory and fun and delicious as alcoholic drinks. Is that right?
Yes, we have a range of non-alcoholic aperitifs, and I think Aperitivo is such a social, cultured, emotive time, you know, that amazing time at the end of the day when you can switch off and have a spritz. And we created a range of non-alc drinks specifically for that moment, you know, when you can eat delicious snacks with your friends, with complex, multifaceted, layered drinks that just don't happen to contain any alcohol.
Yeah, so needed to make it just as fun. We've also got Rupy Warrington, who is the coiner of the phrase Sober Curious, so she will have lots of insights. And we've also got Caggie Dunlop, who is a TV star, singer-songwriter, and the host of a podcast called Saturn Returns. And as I understand it, you've been sober for a while now and have seen some quite dramatic changes to your life.
Yeah, and actually Rupy was really kind of instrumental in that part of my journey, and the whole Saturn Returns podcast kind of ties in because it was during that transition in my life where I really had to readdress my relationship with alcohol, and being on this sober curious journey has been really rewarding for me.
So I guess then, should we jump in with what is Sober Curious to the uninitiated? Caggie, do you want to begin? And then Rupy, I'd love it if you could dive in as you're the sort of genius behind the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I have to definitely give the credit to Rupy. When I was exploring that kind of part of my life, I was drinking a lot throughout my 20s. It was just normal drinking, I think, can also be problem drinking. And it's hard to know because it's such a personalized thing, yet we have quite a one-size-fits-all relationship with alcohol, I think, like in our society. And when I really had to connect, you know, it was undeniable, the connection between my drinking and my mental health. And when I really started addressing those issues, I found it very isolating because I felt like there was AA and then there was normal drinking and there wasn't much in between. And then I actually discovered Rupy on another podcast talking about Sober Curious. And I remember binging, for lack of no pun intended, her podcast on the way to a party, and I was like, okay, this is a community that resonates with my way of thinking and the way that I, you know, want to show up. So be curious. Well, I also don't want to take away from Rupy explaining it, but for me, it's like a way of life that it doesn't necessarily resign you to sobriety in its entirety. It just means that it's more aligned with what's good for your mental health and your overall well-being, that sobriety is like a big kind of part of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Rupy, I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about this community that you've developed and how you've done it and what led you to this point as well.
Well, it was a very personal entry point for me as well, similar to Caggie, similar to so many of us who never actually talk about it or feel it's okay to kind of fess up to the fact that perhaps alcohol and drinking isn't feeling as good as it looks in all the ads, right? I drank heavily through my 20s and 30s, very similar story, came to realize that alcohol was actually having a very detrimental effect on my overall well-being, mental health, emotional health, and physical well-being. Let's not forget the hangovers. And I began to question, why is it that we as adults just assume that we will be drinkers? Why is alcohol so interwoven into all of our social interactions, into our family lives, into our working lives? And I became what I termed sober curious, which rather than, I didn't see my drinking as problematic enough that I needed a program like AA, which preaches total abstinence and has been extremely stigmatized until very, very recently. And I realized that I would need to take it on myself, sort of step outside of the dominant drinking culture to be able to become an observer of that. And that is what being sober curious is. I mean, in a soundbite, it means to question every opportunity, every impulse, and every invitation to drink, rather than just kind of going along with, this is what we do, this is how we socialize, this is how we relax. It's about questioning, hold on, when did we collectively decide that? And do I need to engage in that? You know, what would my life be like without alcohol, without putting any kind of hard and fast rules around it? The curious piece is so important. And this is not about judging anything as right or wrong or good or bad. It's really about opening a doorway so that anybody can come to their own conclusions based on their own lived experience and their own truths about whether alcohol has a place in their life or not.
And you both have said that you didn't think your drinking was problematic enough to warrant an AA or, you know, a fully teetotal lifestyle. How would someone watching this, what are the questions they should ask themselves to figure out if their drinking is becoming a problem? How does one explore that in their own minds? It's quite a big and dark, scary thing to go into.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, and I can only account for my own personal experience, it was noticing the dips in my mental health and then correlating that to when I'd been drinking. And it became so undeniable, like I said before, that actually to continue would have been an act of self-harm in many ways. And I think, you know, such a problem is that drinking is it's so interwoven in our society that it's like how we bond, it's how we celebrate. So I think it's really, you know, addressing whether that is causing your mental health to become imbalanced. And then once you notice that, then like Rupy says, being able to be curious about how you can enter those spaces, questioning it. Like, I think a really difficult thing is how people, and I found myself really isolated at the beginning, because I was like, well, all my friendships and all my social circles are revolved around alcohol. And like, how do I exist in the identity that I built up throughout my 20s in this space? And so I think what was really important for me was to put myself in those situations and to reprogram my mind and give myself new experiences that meant that it was more comfortable to do so, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you said put yourself in those experiences, do you mean going to parties? Do you mean going to the places where you'd normally clink a drink? And
exactly. And I think what a lot of people do, myself included, is they just avoid all those scenarios and all those situations because it can be triggering, because, you know, we are conditioned to think, oh, when I'm feeling a bit anxious or socially anxious or anything like that, we get a drink. It's like a social lubricant. When we're on a date, it's like, well, we drink and then, you know, our guards come down and everything like that. So for me, initially, I would just avoid all those situations. And then it was very easy to abstain from alcohol. But then as soon as I put myself back in those situations, I would drink again. And so actually, for me, the most important thing was to give myself a new experience where I would go into those parties, dates, whatever it might be, and not drink, and then really focus on the reward being the next day when I had that moment of victory, when I was like, I actually, you know, stayed aligned with what I know is right for me. And it's so much more rewarding then, rather than in that tempting moment, just being like, oh, well, this will make the uncomfortable feeling go away. You kind of have to learn to sit with it. And I think, you know, a massive part is people think if they stop drinking that they won't feel uncomfortable things, or like it's going to be some magic solution to stuff, which of course it's not. It just gives you a new way of approaching things and a new way of navigating them, which is that you have to sit in the discomfort rather than numb it.
Yeah, I mean, when you said going on a date without a drink, I mean, I got shivers up my spine. I don't know, for the three of you, what would be, or what was your personal Everest in terms of doing it sober, and how did you face it and get through it? Whoever wants to jump in on that one.
I was probably going on holiday. And I mean, wouldn't a holiday be lovely, right? Not to kind of rub it in, but that none of us have done that for a while. But yeah, holiday drinking was one that I kind of clung on to the longest. And I think for me, that was very telling, coming at it from a sober curious perspective. Why that situation in particular? Well, for me, one of my big reasons I used alcohol was to switch off and relax, which I think a lot of people are experiencing under lockdown as well. It's that thing that signals out of work mode into play mode. And so holidays, of course, were a whole week or more of relaxing. And I realized I didn't actually know how to relax. I adopted such a workaholic mindset. It's almost like alcohol was the only way I could switch off. So I remember doing my first sober holiday and having to almost kind of train myself, or let myself know that it was okay just to lie around doing nothing. And I didn't have to incapacitate myself with a hangover in order to do that, you know? So it's just this huge mindset shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for the dating piece, because that is undeniably challenging, and I think that's where everyone gets a bit nervous, but I learned, not that I've gone on that many dates, but since I've been sober, but a huge part of my relationships have revolved around alcohol in the past, especially at the initial stages. So that was slightly challenging, and I learned that actually saying it before you're on the date is really important, because if you kind of go to a pub or whatever and then you say in that moment, oh, by the way, I don't drink, it can make the other person feel kind of uncomfortable, because then they're like, do I drink as well, or has she just come out of rehab or something? What's going on? Whereas if you say it before and you give it a bit of space for them to digest, you then don't feel that you're on the spot, and yeah, it kind of diffuses the situation. Also, Catherine Gray, who obviously has like done a lot in this space, who wrote The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, she speaks about how it's like a real, you can sort of you can kind of just weed out the bad ones, basically. So if someone challenges you on your sobriety, that's probably means that they're not someone you want to keep in your life, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't it kind of remarkable that you're kind of talking about going on a date without having a drink and having to tee that conversation up in advance? Because as a society, there's still that judgment around not drinking. You have to explain yourself. I wonder, Claire, like, what are your methods and your kind of strategy of getting around that? Like, it should become normal and acceptable. We can do whatever we want, wherever we want.
I've spent the last 20 or so years working in the drinks business, and 15 years of that with a beverage alcohol company. I used to make Belvedere vodka. So I have been very involved in putting great tasting, delicious vodkas on back bars for many years. And for me, my sort of personal journey into non-alcoholic drinks and drinking was a sort of realization that there were hundreds, thousands of bottles on a back bar and very, very little on a menu or in a bar for you to drink when you're not drinking. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, Æcorn is the sister brand to Seedlip, and of course Ben Branson from Seedlip is credited with pioneering this movement 5 years ago and almost articulating that dilemma that we've all felt around what do we drink when we're not drinking. And I think, as Caggie and Rupy both mentioned, culturally in this country, we do socialize with alcohol, celebrate with alcohol, relax with alcohol, and it's interwoven into our lives. And I wanted to create more space on the bar, on menus for people like me and others who perhaps wanted to moderate what they were drinking and didn't want to have to compromise with what they were drinking. And so that's why I left the world of alcohol to join Ben to create Æcorn. And for me, what we do is actually create aperitifs that are not defined by their ABV, their alcohol content. They're defined by flavor, defined by how they look, defined by what goes into the glass, because that's how we do socialize and relax, by we consume with what we see and with what we drink and eat. And just speaking on the social point that we've often heard, that there are other ways to bond and other ways to be social, and that doing anything endorphin triggering is one way to really connect with others. So laughing, dancing, eating, drinking without alcohol equally creates strong social bonds that we can enjoy with a moderate alcohol use or less or no alcohol whatsoever. So I think for me, I've come at it from a completely different perspective, which is through the journey being within the drinks business, and now trying to create more non-alcoholic options, and still hold that space in the drinks world, because we don't want this to be segregated either. We don't want it to be a beverage alcohol industry and us kind of on the side. It all needs to be integrated so everybody can feel that they have a seat at the table or at the bar.
And I wonder, just quickly to wrap up, we've got the celebratory kind of notion of alcohol, Friday night drinks, birthdays, all of that sort of stuff. Caggie, you mentioned earlier the sitting with the uncomfortable feelings, whether that's stress, anxiety, sadness, boredom, in lockdown for a lot of people. Do you have any practical tips for people on how to sit with those feelings and not immediately reach for a glass of wine?
Well, I think that kind of calls to a bigger issue, is that we're not very good at dealing with pain, as I think social media also plays a really big role in that everything has to be perfect and we have to be fine all the time. And so I think when we have these negative feelings or emotions, we are conditioned to numb them out, whether that's by grabbing your phone or eating something or drinking something. And so I think for me, a practice is really just like engaging with that emotion and not over identifying with it, not making it, not putting myself in any shame around it, and actually leaning into it. And it is, of course, painful, and it's not a nice experience always, but you have to go through that in order to get to the other side. And I think a lot of people's relationship with alcohol is they think that it stops it, but it just delays it and it perpetuates it, and it makes it come out and manifest in a different way later on. So I guess the main thing is being able to create that safety in yourself and sit with those uncomfortable feelings and not judge them and healthily process them.
Ruby, do you have any advice for people wanting to try this now? They've watched this, they're inspired. How do we go?
Well, the first thing I wanted to say is just to kind of like quickly touch back to your question about how do we know when our drinking's become a problem? And I think Caggie put it really well. We've had this idea that normal drinking can't be problem drinking. And I think for me, if you've ever asked yourself, am I drinking too much? Is alcohol having a negative impact on my well-being? Chances are the answer is yes, or you wouldn't be asking those questions. If you've ever considered moderating your drinking, some part of you is saying, I want to step back from this. So why not give yourself that opportunity to see what it's like to actually take a break? And in terms of sort of, how to be sober curious, the number one thing is not to drink. And thankfully, there are so many fantastic alcohol-free alternatives. I'm a huge alcohol-free beer fan. There are some great brands out there now that can be really helpful as a sort of placebo to get you after that through that initial hump of the craving. On the other side of that craving might be some uncomfortable feelings that you don't want to sit with. Journaling can be a great practice as a private personal practice where you can just kind of like get some of the feelings out on paper. But I would also implore anybody, especially in this time of social recession, not to do it alone. It just means letting one other person in your life, whether it's a partner, a friend, a family member, maybe it's a therapist, know that you're going to be doing this, that you're going to be taking a break, and asking them, if I text you, can you just text me back? Is it okay if I call you sometimes when I'm going through something hard? We really forget that actually mental health is so much about connection, and it doesn't have to be with a therapist. It can just be a phone call with a friend. And again, Caggie mentioned, we're not very good as a society about just talking about the hard stuff. we'll typically make a joke about it, or kind of like, oh, you know, it's bloody terrible, isn't it, with the roll of the eyes. That's not really getting into the nitty-gritty of what's going on for us. So I think just finding a sort of sober curious buddy who can just be a support to reach out to if things get a bit tough can actually be really invaluable, and kind of fun. You know, I've really enjoyed having some deep conversations on WhatsApp or Zoom or just on the phone with friends during lockdown, which I probably wouldn't have had if I were going about my normal life. And actually being in this kind of environment, it can, if we're intentional about it, create sort of more intimate one-to-one connections with people. So yeah, reach out, don't do it alone. Try stock up on all the amazing alcohol-free alternatives, so you've got something else to reach for in that initial kind of moment of craving. And yeah, just also focus on all of the benefits. We think so much when we quit drinking or take a step back that we're going to be missing out, we're going to be losing out. And yet what we don't hear, and what people are talking about more and more, is actually the amazing benefits that can come from not drinking, whether it's just feeling more calm and confident, getting better sleep, better digestive kind of like system, all sorts of amazing benefits. So trying to focus on those rather than what you might be missing out on.
And as one final practical tip, do you recommend people giving it a go for a week, a month? Like, is there a time frame to try and get past that hump?
I actually have a new book out, which is called The Sober Curious Reset. And that takes you through 100 days of not drinking, which I know might seem a little bit intimidating. However, while a month off, like a dry January or sober September, is a fantastic start, just from my own experience and from many, many people within this sort of community who are doing this work, the 3-month mark is when it really starts to kick in, and it starts to almost become your new normal. Feeling that good, feeling that not hungover starts to become your new normal, and it's much easier to see a path forward where, like, actually maybe life would be better without alcohol.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's fascinating, and hopefully we'll all try and drink a bit less going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.